Section 3 of Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Harry Haller's Records, Part 2. When I had read to the end, it came to my mind that some weeks before I had written one night a rather peculiar poem. Likewise about the Steppenwolf. I made a search among the snowdrift of papers on my writing table, found it, and read. The wolf trots to and fro, the world lies deep in snow, the raven from the birch tree flies, but nowhere a hare, nowhere a roe. The roe, she is so dear, so sweet, if such a thing I might surprise, in my embrace my teeth would meet. What else is there beneath the skies? The lovely creature I would so treasure, and feast myself deep on her tender thigh. I would drink of her red blood full measure, then howl till the night went by. Even a hare I would not despise, sweet enough its warm flesh in the night. Is everything to be denied that could make life a little bright? The hair on my brush is getting gray, the sight is failing from my eyes. Years ago my dear mate died, and now I trot and dream of a roe, I trot and dream of a hare. I hear the wind of midnight howl, I cool with the snow my burning jowl, and on to the devil my wretched soul I bear. So now I had two portraits of myself before me. One a self-portrait in doggerel verse, as sad and sorry as myself. The other painted with the air of a lofty impartiality by one who stood outside, and who knew more and yet less of me than I did myself. And both these pictures of myself, my dispirited and halting poem, and the clever study by an unknown hand, equally afflicted me. Both were right. Both gave the unvarnished truth about my shiftless existence. Both showed clearly how unbearable and untenable my situation was. Death was decreed for the Steppenwolf. He must with his own hand make an end of his detested existence. Unless molten in the fire of a renewed self-knowledge, he underwent a change and passed over to a self, new and undisguised. Alas, this transition was not unknown to me. I had often experienced it already, and always in times of the utmost despair. On each occasion of this terribly uprooting experience, myself, as it then was shattered to fragments. Each time deep-seated powers had shaken and destroyed it. Each time there had followed the loss of a cherished and particularly beloved part of my life that was true to me no more. Once I had lost my profession and livelihood. I had had to forfeit the esteem of those who before had touched their caps to me. Next, my family life fell in ruins overnight, when my wife, whose mind was disordered, drove me from house and home. Love and confidence had changed of a sudden to hate and deadly enmity, and the neighbors saw me go with pitying scorn. It was then that my solitude had its beginning. Years of hardship and bitterness went by. I had built up the ideal of a new life, inspired by the asceticism of the intellect. I had attained a certain serenity and elevation of life once more, submitting myself to the practice of abstract thought and to a rule of austere meditation. But this mold, too, was broken and lost at one blow all its exalted and noble intent. A whirl of travel drove me afresh over the earth. Fresh sufferings were heaped up, and fresh guilt. And every occasion when a mask was torn off, an ideal broken, was preceded by this hateful vacancy and stillness, this deathly constriction and loneliness and unrelatedness, this waste and empty hell of lovelessness and despair such as I had now to pass through once more. It is true that every time my life was shattered in this way, I had in the end gained something, some increase in liberty and in spiritual growth and depth. But with it went an increased loneliness, an increasing chill of severance and estrangement. Looked at with the bourgeois eye, my life had been a continuous descent from one shattering to the next that left me more remote at every step from all that was normal, permissible, and helpful. The passing years had stripped me of my calling, my family, my home. I stood outside all social circles alone, beloved by none, mistrusted by many, in unceasing and bitter conflict with public opinion and morality. And though I lived in a bourgeois setting, I was all the same an utter stranger to this world and all I thought and felt. Religion, country, family, state, all lost their value and meant nothing to me anymore. The pomposity of the sciences, societies, and arts disgusted me. My views and tastes and all that I thought, once the shining adornments of a gifted and sought-after person, had run to seed and neglect and were looked at askance. Granting that I had in the course of all my painful transmutations made some invisible and unaccountable gain, I had had to pay dearly for it, and at every turn my life was harsher, more difficult, lonely, and perilous. In truth, I had little cause to wish to continue in that way which led on into ever thinner air, like the smoke in Nietzsche's Harvest Song. Oh yes, I had experienced all these changes and transmutations that fate reserves for her difficult children, her ticklish customers. I knew them only too well. I knew them as well as a zealous but unsuccessful sportsman knows the stands at a shoot, as an old gambler on the exchange knows each stage of speculation, the scoop, the weakening market, the break and bankruptcy. Was I really to live through all this again? All this torture, all this pressing need, all these glimpses into the paltriness and worthlessness of my own self, the frightful dread lest I succumb and the fear of death? Wasn't it better and simpler to prevent a repetition of so many sufferings and to quit the stage? Certainly it was simpler and better. Whatever the truth of all that was said in the little book on the Steppenwolf about suicides, no one could forbid me the satisfaction of invoking the aid of a gas stove or a razor or a revolver, and so sparing myself this repetition of a process whose bitter agony I had to drink often enough, surely, and to the dregs. No, in all conscience there was no power in the world that could prevail with me to go through the mortal terror of another encounter with myself, to face another reorganization, a new incarnation, when at the end of the road there was no peace or quiet, but forever destroying the self in order to renew the self. Let suicide be as stupid, cowardly, shabby as you please. Call it an infamous and ignominious escape. Still, any escape, even the most ignominious, from this treadmill of suffering was the only thing to wish for. No stage was left for the noble and heroic heart. Nothing was left but the simple choice between a slight and swift pain and an unthinkable, a devouring and endless suffering. I'd played Don Quixote often enough in my difficult, crazed life, had put honor before comfort and heroism before reason. There was an end of it. Daylight was dawning through the window panes, the leaden, infernal daylight of a rainy winter's day, when at last I got to bed. I took my resolution to bed with me. At the very last, however, on the last verge of consciousness in the moment of falling asleep, the remarkable passage in the Steppenwolf pamphlet which deals with the immortals flashed through me. With it came the enchanting recollection that several times, the last quite recently, I had felt near enough to the immortals to share in one measure of old music their cool, bright, austere, and yet smiling wisdom. The memory of it soared, shone out, then died away, and heavy as a mountain, sleep descended on my brain. I woke about midday, and at once the situation as I had disentangled it came back to me. There lay the little book on my bedside table, and my poem. My resolution, too, was there. After the night's sleep it had taken shape and looked at me out of the confusion of my youth with a calm and friendly greeting. Haste makes no speed. My resolve to die was not the whim of an hour. It was the ripe, sound fruit that had grown slowly to full size, lightly rocked by the winds of fate, whose next breath would bring it to the ground. I had in my medicine chest an excellent means of stilling pain, an unusually strong tincture of laudanum. I indulged very rarely in it, and often refrained from using it for months at a time. I had recourse to the drug only when physical pain plagued me beyond endurance. Unfortunately, it was of no use in putting an end to myself. I had proved this some years before. Once, when despair had again got the better of me, I had swallowed a big dose of it, enough to kill 6 men, and yet it had not killed me. I fell asleep, it is true, and lay for several hours completely stupefied. But then, to my frightful disappointment, I was half awakened by violent convulsions of the stomach, and fell asleep once more. It was the middle of the next day when I woke up in earnest in a state of dismal sobriety. My empty brain was burning, and I had almost lost my memory. Apart from a spell of insomnia and severe pains in the stomach, no trace of the poison was left. This expedient, then, was no good, but I put my resolution in this way. The next time I felt that I must have recourse to the opium, I might allow myself to use big means instead of small, that is, a death of absolute certainty with a bullet or a razor. Then I could be sure. As for waiting till my 50th birthday, as the little book wittily prescribed, this seemed to me much too long a delay. There were still 2 years till then. Whether it were a year hence or a month, were it even the following day, the door stood open. I cannot say that the resolution altered my life very profoundly. It made me a little more indifferent to my afflictions, a little freer in the use of opium and wine, a little more inquisitive to know the limits of endurance, but that was all. The other experiences of that evening had a strong after-effect. I read the Steppenwolf treatise through again many times, now submitting gratefully to an indivisible magician because of his wise conduct of my destiny, now with scorn and contempt for its futility, and the little understanding it showed of my actual disposition and predicament. All that was written there of Steppenwolves and suicides was very good, no doubt, and very clever. It might do for the species, the type, but it was too wide a mesh to catch my own individual soul, my unique and unexampled destiny. What, however, occupied my thoughts more than all else was the hallucination, or vision, of the church wall. The announcement made by the dancing illuminated letters promised much that was hinted at in the treatise, and the voices of that strange world had powerfully aroused my curiosity. For hours I pondered deeply over them. On these occasions I was more and more impressed by the warning of that inscription, "Not for everybody, and for madmen only." Madman, then, I must certainly be, and far from the mold of everybody if those voices reached me and that world spoke to me. In heaven's name, had I not long ago been remote from the life of everybody and from normal thinking and normal existence? Had I not long ago given ample margin to isolation and madness? All the same, I understood the summons well enough in my innermost heart. Yes, I understood the invitation to madness and the jettison of reason, and the escape from the clogs of convention and surrender to the unbridled surge of spirit and fantasy. One day, after I had made one more vain search through streets and squares for the man with the signboard and prowled several times past the wall of the invisible door with watchful eye, I met a funeral procession in St. Martin's. While I was contemplating the faces of the mourners who followed the hearse with halting step, I thought to myself, where in this town or in the whole world is the man whose death would be a loss to me? And where is the man to whom my death would mean anything? There was Erica, it is true, but for a long while we had lived apart. We rarely saw one another without quarreling, and at the moment I did not even know her address. She came to see me now and then, or I made the journey to her, and since both of us were lonely, difficult people related somehow to one another in soul and sickness of soul, there was a link between us that held in spite of all. But would she not perhaps breathe more freely if she heard of my death? I did not know. I did not know either how far my own feeling for her was to be relied on. To know anything of such matters, one needs to live in a world of practical possibilities. Meanwhile, obeying my fancy, I had fallen in at the rear of the funeral procession and jogged along behind the mourners to the cemetery, an up-to-date affair, all of concrete and complete with crematorium. The deceased in question was not, however, to be cremated. His coffin was set down before a simple hole in the ground, and I saw the clergyman and the other vultures and functionaries of a burial establishment going through their performances, to which they endeavored to give all the appearance of great ceremony and sorrow, and with such effect that they outdid themselves, and from pure play-acting they got caught in their own lies, and ended by being comic. I saw how their black professional robes fell in folds, and what pains they took to work up the company of mourners and to force them to bend the knee before the majesty of death. It was labor in vain. Nobody wept. The deceased did not appear to have been indispensable, nor could anyone be talked into a pious frame of mind. And when the clergyman addressed the company repeatedly as "dear fellow Christians," all the silent faces of these shop people and master bakers and their wives were turned down in embarrassment, and expressed nothing but the wish that this uncomfortable function might soon be over. When the end came, the two foremost of the fellow Christians shook the clergyman's hand, scraped the moist clay in which the dead had been laid from their shoes at the next scraper, and without hesitation their faces again showed their natural expression. And then it was that one of them seemed suddenly familiar. It was, so it seemed to me, the man who had carried the signboard and thrust the little book into my hands. At the moment when I thought I recognized him, he stopped and, stooping down, carefully turned up his black trousers, and then walked away at a smart pace with his umbrella clipped under his arm. I walked after him, but when I overtook him and gave him a nod, he did not appear to recognize me. "Is there no show tonight?" I asked with an attempt at a wink such as two conspirators give each other. But it was long ago that such pantomime was familiar to me. Indeed, living as I did, I had almost lost the habit of speech, and I felt myself that I only made a silly grimace. "Show tonight," he growled, and looked at me as though he had never set eyes on me before. "Go to the Black Eagle, man, if that's what you want." And in fact I was no longer certain it was he. I was disappointed, and feeling the disappointment I walked on aimlessly. I had no motives, no incentives to exert myself, no duties. Life tasted horribly bitter. I felt that the long-standing disgust was coming to a crisis, and that life pushed me out and cast me aside. I walked through the gray streets in a rage, and everything smelt of moist earth and burial. I swore that none of these death vultures should stand at my grave, with cassocks and fellow Christianly murmurings. Look where I might and think what I might, there was no cause for rejoicing, and nothing beckoned me. There was nothing to charm or tempt me. Everything was old, withered, gray, limp and spent, and stank of staleness and decay. Dear God, how was it possible? How had I, with the wings of youth and poetry, come to this? Art and travel and the glow of ideals. And now this. How had this paralysis of hatred against myself and everyone else, this obstruction of all feeling, this mud hell of an empty heart and despair crept over me so softly and so slowly? Passing by the library, I met a young professor of whom in earlier years I used to occasionally to see a good deal. When I last stayed in the town some years before, I had even been several times to his house to talk Oriental mythology, a study in which I was then very much interested. He came in my direction, walking stiffly, and with a short-sighted air, and only recognized me at the last moment as I was passing by. In my lamentable state, I was half thankful for the cordiality with which he threw himself on me. His pleasure in seeing me became quite lively, as he recalled the talks we had had together, and assured me that he owed a great deal to the stimulus they had given him, and that he often thought of me. He had rarely had such stimulating and productive discussions with any colleague since. He asked how long I had been in the town. I lied and said a few days, and why I had not looked him up. The learned man held me with his friendly eye, and though I really found it all ridiculous, I could not help enjoying these crumbs of warmth and kindliness, and was lapping them up like a starved dog. Harry, the Steppenwolf, was moved to a grin. Saliva collected in his parched throat, and against his will he bowed down to sentiment. Yes, zealously piling lie upon lie, I said that I was only here in passing, for the purpose of research, and should of course have paid him a visit, but that I had not been feeling very fit. And when he went on to invite me very heartily to spend the evening with him, I accepted with thanks, and sent my greetings to his wife, until my cheeks fairly ached with the unaccustomed efforts of all these forced smiles and speeches. And while I, Harry Haller, stood there in the street, flattered and surprised and studiously polite and smiling into the good fellow's kindly, short-sighted face, there stood the other Harry, too, at my elbow, and grinned likewise. He stood there and grinned as he thought what a funny, crazy, dishonest fellow I was to show my teeth in rage and curse the whole world one moment, and the next, to be falling all over myself in the eagerness of my response to the first amiable greeting of the first good honest fellow who came my way, to be wallowing like a suckling pig in the luxury of a little pleasant feeling and friendly esteem. Thus stood the two Harrys, neither playing a very pretty part over against the worthy professor, mocking one another, watching one another, and spitting at one another, while as always in such predicaments the eternal question presented itself, whether all this was simply stupidity and human frailty, a common depravity, or whether this sentimental egoism and perversity, this slovenliness and two-facedness of feeling, was merely a personal idiosyncrasy of the Steppenwolfs. And if this nastiness was common to men in general, I could rebound from it, with renewed energy into hatred of all the world. But if it was a personal frailty, it was good occasion for an orgy of hatred of myself. While my two selves were thus locked in conflict, the professor was almost forgotten, and when the oppressiveness of his presence came suddenly back to me, I made haste to be relieved of it. I looked after him for a long while as he disappeared into the distance along the leafless avenue, with the good-natured and slightly comic gait of an ingenuous idealist. Within me the battle raged furiously. Mechanically I bent and unbent my stiffened fingers as though to fight the ravages of a secret poison, and at the same time had to realize that I had been nicely framed. Round my neck was the invitation for 8:30, with all its obligations of politeness, of talking shop, and of contemplating another's domestic bliss, and so home, in wrath. Once there, I poured myself out some brandy and water, swallowed some of my gout pills with it, and, lying on the sofa, tried to read. No sooner had I succeeded in losing myself for a moment in Sophia's Journey from Memel to Saxony, a delightful old book of the 18th century, than the invitation came over me of a sudden and reminded me that I was neither shaved nor dressed. Why, in heaven's name, had I brought all this on myself? Well, get up, so I told myself. Lather yourself, scrape your chin till it bleeds. Dress and show an amiable disposition towards your fellow men. And while I lathered my face, I thought of that sordid hole in the clay of the cemetery into which some unknown person had been lowered that day. I thought of the pinched faces of the bored fellow Christians, and I could not even laugh. There in that sordid hole in the clay, I thought, to the accompaniment of stupid and insincere ministrations and the no less stupid and insincere demeanor of the group of mourners, in the discomforting sight of all the metal crosses and marble slabs and artificial flowers of wire and glass, and did not only that unknown man, and tomorrow or the day after myself as well, buried in the soil with a hypocritical show of sorrow. No, there, and so ended everything. All our striving, all our culture, all our beliefs, all our joy and pleasure in life, already sick and soon to be buried there too. Our whole civilization was a cemetery where Jesus Christ and Socrates, Mozart and Haydn, Dante and Goethe were but the indecipherable names on mouldering stones, and the mourners who stood round affecting a pretense of sorrow would give much to believe in these inscriptions which once were holy, or at least to utter one heartfelt word of grief and despair about this world that is no more. And nothing was left them but the embarrassed grimaces of a company round a grave. As I raged on like this, I cut my chin in the usual place and had to apply a caustic to the wound. And even so, there was my clean collar, scarce put on to change again, and all this for an invitation that did not give me the slightest pleasure. And yet a part of me began play-acting again, calling the professor a sympathetic fellow, yearning after a little talk and intercourse with my fellow men, reminding me of the professor's pretty wife, prompting me to believe that an evening spent with my pleasant host and hostess would be in reality positively cheering, helping me to clap some court plaster to my chin, to put on my clothes and tie my tie well, and gently putting me, in fact, far from my genuine desire of staying at home. Whereupon it occurred to me, so it is with everyone. Just as I dress and go out to visit the professor and exchange a few more or less insincere compliments with him, without really wanting to at all, so it is with the majority of men day by day and hour by hour in their daily lives and affairs. Without really wanting to at all, they pay calls and carry on conversations, sit out their hours at desks and on office chairs, and it is all compulsory, mechanical, and against the grain, and it could all be done or left undone just as well by machines. And indeed, it is this never-ceasing machinery that prevents their being, like me, the critics of their own lives, and recognizing the stupidity and shallowness, the hopeless tragedy and waste of the lives they lead, and the awful ambiguity grinning over it all. And they are right. right 1,000 times to live as they do, playing their games and pursuing their business instead of resisting the dreary machine and staring into the void as I do who have left the track. Let no one think that I blame other men, though now and then in these pages I scorn and even deride them, or that I accuse them of the responsibility of my personal misery. But now that I have come so far, and standing as I do on the extreme verge of life, where the ground falls away before me into bottomless darkness, I should do wrong and I should lie if I pretended to myself or to others that that machine still revolved for me, and that I was still obedient to the eternal child's play of that charming world. On all this, the evening before me afforded a remarkable commentary. I paused a moment in front of the house and looked up at the windows. There he lives, I thought, and carries on his labors year by year, reads and annotates texts, seeks for analogies between Western, Asiatic, and Indian mythologies, and it satisfies him because he believes in the value of it all. He believes in the studies whose servant he is. He believes in the value of mere knowledge and its acquisition because he believes in progress and evolution. He has not been through the war, nor is he acquainted with the shattering of the foundations of thought by Einstein. That, thinks he, only concerns the mathematicians. He sees nothing of the preparations for the next war that are going on all around him. He hates Jews and communists. He is a good, unthinking, happy child, who takes himself seriously, and in fact he is much to be envied. And so, pulling myself together, I entered the house. A maid in cap and apron opened the door. Warned by some premonition, I noticed with care where she laid my hat and coat, and was then shown into a warm and well-lighted room and requested to wait. Instead of saying a prayer or taking a nap, I followed a wayward impulse and picked up the first thing I saw. It chanced to be a small picture in a frame that stood on the round table, leaning back on its pasteboard support. It was an engraving, and it represented the poet Goethe as an old man full of character, with a finely chiseled face and a genius's mien. Neither the renowned fire of his eyes nor the lonely and tragic expression beneath the courtly whitewash was lacking. To this the artist had given special care, and he had succeeded in combining the elemental force of the old man with a somewhat professional make-up of self-discipline and righteousness, without prejudice to his profundity, and had made of him, all in all, a real charming old gentleman, fit to adorn any drawing-room. No doubt this portrait was no worse than others of its description. It was much the same as all those representations by careful craftsmen of saviors, apostles, heroes, thinkers, and statesmen. Perhaps I found it exasperating only because of a certain pretentious virtuosity. In any case, and whatever the cause, this empty and self-satisfied presentation of the aged Goethe shrieked at me at once as a fatal discord, exasperated and oppressed as I was already. It told me that I ought never to have come. Here fine old masters and the nation's great ones were at home, not Steppenwolfs. If only the master of the house had come in now, I might have had the luck to find some favorable opportunity for finding my way out. As it was, his wife came in, and I surrendered to fate, though I scented danger. We shook hands, and to the first discord there succeeded nothing but new ones. The lady complimented me on my looks, though I knew only too well how sadly the years had aged me since our last meeting. The clasp of her hand on my gouty fingers had reminded me of it already. Then she went on to ask after my dear wife, and I had to say that my wife had left me and that we were divorced. We were glad enough when the professor came in. He, too, gave me a hearty welcome, and the awkward comedy came to a beautiful climax. He was holding a newspaper to which he subscribed, an organ of the militarist and jingoist party, and after shaking hands he pointed to it and commented on a paragraph about a namesake of mine, a publicist called Haller, a bad fellow and a rotten patriot, who had been making fun of the Kaiser and expressing the view that his own country was no less responsible for the outbreak of war than the enemy nations. There was a man for you. The editor had given him his deserts and put him in the pillory. However, when the professor saw that I was not interested, we passed to other topics, and the possibility that this horrid fellow might be sitting in front of them did not even remotely occur to either of them. Yet, so it was. I myself was that horrid fellow. Well, why make a fuss and upset people? I laughed to myself, but gave up all hope now of a pleasant evening. I have a clear recollection of the moment when the professor spoke of Haller as a traitor to his country. It was then that the horrid feeling of depression and despair which had been mounting in me and growing stronger and stronger ever since the burial scene condensed to a dreary dejection. It rose to the pitch of a bodily anguish, arousing within me a dread and suffocating foreboding. I had the feeling that something lay in wait for me, that a danger stalked from behind. Fortunately, the announcement that dinner was on the table supervened. We went into the dining room, and while I racked my brains again and again for something harmless to say, I ate more than I was accustomed to do, and felt myself growing more wretched with every moment. Good heavens, I thought all the while, why do we put ourselves to such exertions? I felt distinctly that my hosts were not at their ease either, and that their livelihood was forced, whether it was that I had a paralyzing effect on them or because of some other and domestic embarrassment. There was not a question they put to me that I could answer frankly. I was soon fairly entangled in my lies and wrestling with my nausea at every word. At last, for the sake of changing the subject, I began to tell them of the funeral which I had witnessed earlier in the day, but I could not hit the right note. My efforts at humor fell entirely flat, and we were more than ever at odds. Within me, the Steppenwolf bared his teeth in a grin. By the time we had reached dessert, silence had descended on all three of us. We went back to the room we had come from to invoke the aid of coffee and cognac. There, however, my eye fell once more on the magnate of poetry, although he had been put on a chest of drawers at one side of the room. Unable to get away from him, I took him once more in my hands, though warning voices were plainly audible, and proceeded to attack him. I was as though obsessed by the feeling that the situation was intolerable, and that the time had come either to warm my hosts up, to carry them off their feet and put them in tune with myself, or else to bring about a final explosion. "Let us hope," said I, "that Goethe did not really look like this. This conceited air of nobility, the great man ogling the distinguished company, and beneath the manly exterior, what a world of charming sentimentality. Certainly there is much to be said against him. I have a good deal against his venerable pomposity myself, but to represent him like this, no, that is going too far." The lady of the house finished pouring out the coffee with a deeply wounded expression, and then hurriedly left the room, and her husband explained to me with mingled embarrassment and reproach that the picture of Goethe belonged to his wife and was one of her dearest possessions. "And even if objectively speaking you're right, though I don't agree with you, you need not have been so outspoken." "There you are right," I admitted. "Unfortunately, it is a habit, a vice of mine always to speak my mind as much as possible, as indeed Goethe did, too, in his better moments. In this chaste drawing-room, Goethe would certainly never have allowed himself to use an outrageous, a genuine and unqualified expression. I sincerely beg your wife's pardon and your own. Tell her, please, that I am a schizomaniac, and now, if you will allow me, I will take my leave." To this he made objections in spite of his perplexity. He even went back to the subject of our former discussions, and said once more how interesting and stimulating they had been, and how deep an impression my theories about Mithras and Krishna had made on him at the time. He had hoped that the present occasion would have been an opportunity to renew these discussions. I thanked him for speaking as he did. Unfortunately, my interest in Krishna had vanished, and also my pleasure in learned discussions. Further, I had told him several lies that day. For example, I had been many months in the town, and not a few days, as I had said. I lived, however, quite by myself, and was no longer fit for decent society. For in the first place, I was nearly always in a bad temper and afflicted with the gout, and in the second place, usually drunk. Lastly, to make a clean slate, and not to go away, at least as a liar, it was my duty to inform him that he had grievously insulted me that evening. He had endorsed the attitude taken up by a reactionary paper towards Haller's opinions, a stupid bull-necked paper fit for an officer on half-pay, not for a man of learning. This bad fellow and rotten patriot, Haller, however, and myself were one and the same person, and it would be better for our country and the world in general if at least the few people who were capable of thought stood for reason and the love of peace instead of heading wildly with a blind obsession for a new war. And so I would bid him goodbye. With that, I got up and took leave of Goethe and of the professor. I seized my hat and coat from the rack outside and left the house. Loud in my soul the wolf howled his glee, and between my two selves there opened an immense field of operations. For it was at once clear to me that this disagreeable evening had much more significance for me than for the indignant professor. For him it was a disillusionment and a petty outrage. For me it was a final failure and flight. It was my leave-taking from the respectable, moral, and learned world, and a complete triumph for the Steppenwolf. I was sent flying and beaten from the field, bankrupt in my own eyes, dismissed without a shred of credit or a ray of humor to comfort me. I had taken leave of the world in which I had once found a home, the world of convention and culture, in the manner of the man with a weak stomach who has given up pork. In a rage I went on my way beneath the street lamps, in a rage and sick unto death. What a hideous day of shame and wretchedness it had been from morning to night, from the cemetery to the scene with the professor. For what? And why? Was there any sense in taking up the burden of more such days as this, or of sitting out any more such suppers? There was not. This very night I would make an end of the comedy, go home and cut my throat. No more tarrying. I paced the streets in all directions, driven on by wretchedness. Naturally it was stupid of me to bespatter the drawing-room ornaments of the worthy folk, stupid and ill-mannered, but I could not help it. And even now I could not help it. I could not bear this tame, lying, well-mannered life any longer. And since it appeared that I could not bear my loneliness any longer either, since my own company had become so unspeakably hateful and nauseous, since I struggled for breath in a vacuum and suffocated in hell, what way out was left me? There was none. I thought of my father and mother, of the sacred flame of my youth long extinct, of the thousand joys and labors and aims of my life. Nothing of them all was left me, not even repentance, nothing but agony and nausea. Never had the clinging to mere life seemed so grievous as now. I rested a moment in a tavern in an outlying part of the town, and drank some brandy and water. Then to the streets once more with the devil at my heels, up and down the steep and winding streets of the old town, along the avenues, across the station square. The thought of going somewhere took me into the station. I scanned the timetables on the walls, drank some wine, and tried to come to my senses. Then the spectre that I went in dread of came nearer, till I saw it plain. It was the dread of returning to my room and coming to a halt there, faced by my despair. There was no escape from this moment, though I walked the streets for hours. Sooner or later I should be at my door, at the table with my books, on the sofa with the photograph of Erica above it. Sooner or later the moment would come to take out my razor and cut my throat. More and more plainly the picture rose before me. More and more plainly, with a wildly beating heart, I felt the dread of all dreads, the fear of death. Yes, I was horribly afraid of death. Although I saw no other way out, although nausea, agony, and despair threatened to engulf me, although life had no allurement and nothing to give me either of joy or hope, I shuddered all the same with an unspeakable horror of a gaping wound in a condemned man's flesh. I saw no other way of escape from this dreadful spectre. Suppose that today cowardice won a victory over despair. Tomorrow and each succeeding day I would again face despair heightened by self-contempt. It was merely taking up and throwing down the knife till at last it was done. Better today, then. I reasoned with myself as though with a frightened child. But the child would not listen. It ran away. It wanted to live. I renewed my fitful wanderings through the town, making many detours not to return to the house, which I had always in my mind and always deferred. Here and there I came to a stop and lingered, drinking a glass or two, and then, as if pursued, ran around in a circle whose center had the razor as a goal, and meant death. Sometimes from utter weariness I sat on a bench, on a fountain's rim, or a curbstone, and wiped the sweat from my forehead, and listened to the beating of my heart. Then on again in mortal dread and an intense yearning for life. Thus it was I found myself late at night in a distant and unfamiliar part of the town, and there I went into a public house from which there came the lively sound of dance music. Over the entrance as I went in I read "The Black Eagle" on the old signboard. Within I found it was a free night. Crowds, smoke, the smell of wine, and the clamor of voices, with dancing in a room at the back, whence issued the frenzy of music. I stayed in the nearer room, where there were none but simple folk, some of them poorly dressed, whereas behind in the dance hall smart people were also to be seen. Carried forward by the crowd, I soon found myself near the bar, wedged against a table at which sat a pale and pretty girl against the wall. She wore a thin dance frock, cut very low, and a withered flower in her hair. She gave me a friendly and observant look as I came up, and with a smile moved to one side to make room for me. "May I?" I asked, and sat down beside her. "Of course you may," she said. "But who are you?" "Thanks," I replied. "I cannot possibly go home. Cannot. I'll stay here with you if you'll let me. No, I can't go back home." She nodded as though to humor me, and as she nodded I observed a curl that fell from her temple to her ear, and I saw that the withered flower was a camellia. From within crashed the music, and at the buffet the waitresses hurriedly shouted their orders. "Well, stay here then," she said with a voice that comforted me. "Why can't you go home?" "I can't. There's something waiting for me there. No, I can't. It's too frightful." "Let it wait, then, and stay here. First, wipe your glasses. You can see nothing like that. Give me your handkerchief. What shall we drink? Burgundy?" While she wiped my glasses, I had the first clear impression of her pale, firm face, with its clear gray eyes and smooth forehead, and the short, tight curl in front of her ear. Good-naturedly and with a touch of mockery, she began to take me in hand. She ordered the wine, and as she clinked her glass with mine, her eyes fell on my shoes. "Good Lord, wherever have you come from? You look as though you had come from Paris on foot. That's no state to come to a dance in." I answered yes and no, laughed now and then, and let her talk. I found her charming, very much to my surprise, for I had always avoided girls of her kind and regarded them with suspicion, and she treated me exactly in the way that was best for me at that moment. And so she has since, without an exception. She took me under her wing just as I needed, and mocked me too just as I needed. She ordered me a sandwich and told me to eat it. She filled my glass and bade me sip it and not drink too fast. Then she commended my docility. "That's fine," she said to encourage me. "You're not difficult. I wouldn't mind betting it's a long while since you have had to obey anyone." "You'd win the bet. How did you know it?" "Nothing in that. Obeying is like eating and drinking. There's nothing like it if you've been without it too long. Isn't it so? You're glad to do as I tell you?" "Very glad. You know everything." "You make it easy to. Perhaps, my friend, I could tell you, too, what it is that's waiting for you at home, and what you dread so much. But you know that for yourself. We needn't talk about it, eh? Silly business. Either a man goes and hangs himself, and then he hangs sure enough, and he'll have his reasons for it, or else he goes on living, and then he has only living to bother himself with. Simple enough." "Oh," I cried, "if only it were so simple. I've bothered myself enough with life, God knows, and little use it has been to me. To hang oneself is hard, perhaps, I don't know. But to live is far, far harder. God, how hard it is." "You'll see it's child's play. We've made a start already. You've polished your glasses, eaten something, and had a drink. Now we'll go and give your shoes and trousers a brush, and then you'll dance a shimmy with me." "Now that shows," I cried in a fluster, "that I was right. Nothing could grieve me more than not to be able to carry out any command of yours. But I can dance no shimmy, nor waltz, nor polka, nor any of the rest of them. I've never danced in my life. Now you can see it isn't all as easy as you think." Her bright red lips smiled, and she firmly shook her waved and shingled head, and as I looked at her I thought I could see a resemblance to Rosa Kreisler, with whom I had been in love as a boy. But she had a dark complexion and dark hair. I could not tell of whom it was she reminded me. I knew only that it was of someone in my early youth and boyhood. "Wait a minute," she cried. "So you can't dance? Not at all? Not even a one-step? And yet you talk of the trouble you've taken to live. You told a fib there, my boy, and you shouldn't do that at your age. How can you say that you've taken any trouble to live when you won't even dance?" "But if I can't, I've never learnt." She laughed. "But you learnt reading and writing and arithmetic, I suppose, and French and Latin and a lot of other things. I don't mind betting you were 10 or 12 years at school and studied whatever else you could as well. Perhaps you've even got your doctor's degree, and no Chinese or Spanish. Am I right? Very well, then. But you couldn't find the time and money for a few dancing lessons? No, indeed. It was my parents, I said to justify myself. They let me learn Latin and Greek and all the rest of it, but they didn't let me learn to dance. It wasn't the thing with us. My parents had never danced themselves. She looked at me quite coldly with real contempt, and again something in her face reminded me of my youth. So your parents must take the blame, then? Did you ask them whether you might spend the evening at the Black Eagle? Did you? They're dead a long while ago, you say? So much for that. And now supposing you were too obedient to learn to dance when you were young. Though I don't believe you were such a model child. What have you been doing with yourself all these years? Well, I confessed, I scarcely know myself. Studied, played music, read books, written books, traveled. Fine views of life you have. You have always done the difficult and complicated things, and the simple ones you haven't even learnt. No time, of course. More amusing things to do. Well, thank God I'm not your mother. But to do as you do and then say you've tested life to the bottom and found nothing in it is going a bit too far. Don't scold me, I implored. It isn't as if I didn't know I was mad. Oh, don't make a song of your sufferings. You're no madman, Professor. You're not half mad enough to please me. It seems to me you're too clever in a silly way, just like a professor. Have another roll. You can tell me some more later. She got another roll for me, put a little salt and mustard on it, cut a piece for herself, and told me to eat it. I did all she told me except dance. It did me a prodigious lot of good to do as I was told, and have someone sitting by me who asked me things and ordered me about and scolded me. If the professor or his wife had done so an hour or two earlier, it would have spared me a lot. But no, it was well as it was. I should have missed much. What's your name? She asked suddenly. Harry. Harry? A babyish sort of name. And a baby you are, Harry, in spite of your few gray hairs. You're a baby, and you need someone to look after you. I'll say no more of dancing, but look at your hair. Have you no wife, no sweetheart? I haven't a wife any longer. We are divorced. A sweetheart, yes, but she doesn't live here. I don't see her very often. We don't get on very well. She whistled softly. You must be difficult if nobody sticks to you. But now tell me what was up in particular this evening. What sent you chasing round out of your wits? Down on your luck? Lost at cards? This was not easy to explain. Well, I began. You see, it was really a small matter. I had an invitation to dinner with a professor. I'm not one myself, by the way, and really I ought not to have gone. I've lost the habit of being in company and making conversation. I've forgotten how it's done. As soon as I entered the house, I had the feeling something would go wrong, and when I hung my hat on the peg, I thought to myself that perhaps I should want it sooner than I expected. Well, at the professor's there was a picture that stood on the table. A stupid picture. It annoyed me. What sort of picture? Annoyed you? Why? She broke in. Well, it was a picture representing Goethe, the poet Goethe, you know. But it was not in the least as he really looked. That, of course, nobody can know exactly. He has been dead 100 years. However, some artist of today had painted his portrait as he imagined him to have been, and prettified him, and this picture annoyed me. It made me perfectly sick. I don't know whether you can understand that. I understand all right. Don't you worry. Go on. Before this, in any case, I didn't see eye to eye with the professor. Like nearly all professors, he is a great patriot, and during the war did his bit in the way of deceiving the public, with the best intentions, of course. I, however, am opposed to war. But that's all one. To continue my story, there was not the least need for me to look at the picture. Certainly not. But in the first place, it made me sorry because of Goethe, whom I love very dearly. And then, besides, I thought, well, I'd better say just how I thought or felt. There I was, sitting with people as one of themselves, and believing that they thought of Goethe as I did, and had the same picture of him in their minds as I. And there stood that tasteless, false, and sickly affair, and they thought it lovely, and had not the least idea that the spirit of that picture and the spirit of Goethe were exact opposites. They thought the picture splendid, and so they might for all I cared, but for me it ended, once and for all, any confidence, any friendship, any feeling of affinity I could have for these people. In any case, my friendship with them did not amount to very much, and so I got furious. And sad, too, when I saw that I was quite alone with no one to understand me. Do you see what I mean?
It is very easy to see. And next, did you throw the picture at them?
No, but I was rather insulting and left the house. I wanted to go home, but...
But you would have found no mummy there to comfort the silly baby or scold it. I must say, Harry, you make me almost sorry for you. I never knew such a baby.
So it seemed to me, I must own. She gave me a glass of wine to drink. In fact, she was like a mother to me. In a glimpse, though, now and then, I saw how young and beautiful she was.
And so, she began again, Goethe has been dead 100 years, and you're very fond of him, and you have a wonderful picture in your head of what he must have looked like, and you have the right to, I suppose. But the artist who adores Goethe, too, and makes a picture of him, has no right to do it, nor the professor either, nor anybody else, because you don't like it. You find it intolerable. You have to be insulting and leave the house. If you had sense, you would laugh at the artist and the professor. Laugh and be done with it. If you were out of your senses, you'd smash the picture in their faces. But as you're only a little baby, you run home and want to hang yourself. I've understood your story very well, Harry. It's a funny story. You make me laugh. But don't drink so fast. Burgundy should be sipped. Otherwise you'll get hot. But you have to be told everything, like a little child.
She admonished me with the look of a severe governess of 60.
Oh, I know, I said contentedly.
Only tell me everything.
What shall I tell you?
Whatever you feel like telling me.
Good. Then I'll tell you something. For an hour I've been saying thou to you, and you have been saying you to me. Always Latin and Greek, always as complicated as possible. When a girl addresses you intimately and she isn't disagreeable to you, then you should address her in the same way. So now you've learnt something. And secondly, for half an hour I've known that you're called Harry. I know it because I asked you, but you don't care to know my name.
Oh, but indeed, I'd like to know very much.
You're too late. If we meet again, you can ask me again. Today I shan't tell you. And now I'm going to dance.
At the first sign she made of getting up, my heart sank like lead. I dreaded her going and leaving me alone, for then it would all come back as it was before. In a moment the old dread and wretchedness took hold of me like a toothache that had passed off, and then comes back of a sudden and burns like fire. Oh God, had I forgotten then what was waiting for me? Had anything altered?
Stop, I implored. Don't go. You can dance, of course, as much as you please, but don't stay away too long. Come back again. Come back again.
She laughed as she got up. I expected that she would have been taller. She was slender, but not tall. Again I was reminded of someone.
Of whom? I could not make out. You're coming back? I'm coming back, but it may be half an hour, or an hour perhaps. I want to tell you something. Shut your eyes and sleep for a little. That's what you need.
I made room for her to pass. Her skirt brushed my knees, and she looked as she went in a little pocket mirror, lifted her eyebrows, and powdered her chin. Then she disappeared into the dance hall. I looked round me, strange faces, smoking men, spilt beer on marble tops, clatter and clamor everywhere, the dance music in my ear. I was to sleep, she had said. Ah, my good child, you know a lot about my sleep that is shyer than a weasel. Sleep in this hurly-burly, sitting at a table amidst a clatter of beer pots? I sipped the wine, and taking out a cigar, looked round for matches. But as I had after all no inclination to smoke, I put down the cigar on the table in front of me. Shut your eyes, she had said. God knows where the girl got her voice. It was so deep and good and maternal. It was good to obey such a voice. I'd found that out already. Obediently, I shut my eyes, leant my head against the wall, and heard the roar of 100 mingled noises surge around me, and smiled at the idea of sleep in such a place. I made up my mind to go to the door of the dance hall, and from there catch a glimpse of my beautiful girl as she danced. I made a movement to go, then felt at last how unutterably tired out I was from my hours of wandering, and remained seated. And thereupon I fell asleep as I'd been told. I slept greedily, thankfully, and dreamt more lightly and pleasantly than I had for a long while. I dreamt that I was waiting in an old-fashioned ante-room. At first I knew no more than that my audience was with some excellency or other. Then it came to me that it was Goethe who was to receive me.
Unfortunately, I was not there quite on a personal call. I was a reporter, and this worried me a great deal, and I could not understand how the devil I had got into such a fix. Besides this, I was upset by a scorpion that I had seen a moment before trying to climb up my leg. I had shaken myself free of the black crawling beast, but I did not know where it had got to next, and did not dare make a grab after it. Also, I was not very sure whether I had been announced by mistake to Matheson instead of Goethe, and him again I mixed up in my dream with Berger, for I took him for the author of the poem to Molly. Moreover, I would have liked extremely to meet Molly. I imagined her wonderful, tender, musical. If only I were not here at the orders of that cursed newspaper office. My ill humor over this increased until by degrees it extended even to Goethe, whom I suddenly treated to all manner of reflections and reproaches. It was going to be a lively interview. The scorpion, however, dangerous though he was, and hidden, no doubt, somewhere within an inch of me, was all the same not so bad, perhaps. Possibly he might even betoken something friendly. It seemed to me extremely likely that he had something to do with Molly. He might be a kind of messenger from her, or a heraldic beast, dangerously and beautifully emblematic of woman and sin. Might not his name perhaps be Vulpius? But at that moment a flunky threw open the door. I rose and went in. There stood old Goethe, short and very erect, and on his classic breast, sure enough, was the corpulent star of some order. Not for a moment did he relax his commanding attitude, his air of giving audience and of controlling the world from that museum of his at Weimar. Indeed, he had scarcely looked at me before. With a nod and a jerk like an old raven, he began pompously. "Now, you young people have, I believe, very little appreciation of us and our efforts." "You are quite right," said I, chilled by his ministerial glance. "We young people have, indeed, very little appreciation of you. You are too pompous for us, Excellency, too vain and pompous, and not outright enough. That is, no doubt at the bottom of it, not outright enough." The little old man bent his erect head forward, and as his hard mouth with its official folds relaxed in a little smile and became enchantingly alive, my heart gave a sudden bound. For all at once the poem came to my mind, "The Dusk with Folding Wing," and I remembered that it was from the lips of this man that the poem came. Indeed, at this moment I was entirely disarmed and overwhelmed, and would have chosen of all things to kneel before him. But I held myself erect, and heard him say with a smile, "Oh, so you accuse me of not being outright. What a thing to say! Will you explain yourself a little more fully?" I was very glad indeed to do so. Like all great spirits, Herr von Goethe, you have clearly recognized and felt the riddle and the hopelessness of human life, with its moments of transcendence that sink again to wretchedness, and the impossibility of rising to one fair peak of feeling, except at the cost of many days' enslavement to the daily round. And then the ardent longing for the realm of the spirit in eternal and deadly war with the equally ardent and holy love of the lost innocence of nature, the whole frightful suspense and vacancy and uncertainty, this condemnation to the transient that can never be valid, that is, ever experimental and dilettantish, in short, the utter lack of purpose to which the human state is condemned to its consuming despair. You have known all this, yes, and said as much over and over again. Yet you gave up your whole life to preaching its opposite, giving utterance to faith and optimism, and spreading before yourself and others the illusion that our spiritual strivings mean something and endure. You have lent a deaf ear to those that plumbed the depths and suppressed the voices that told the truth of despair, and not in yourself only, but also in Kleist and Beethoven. Year after year you lived on at Weimar, accumulating knowledge and collecting objects, writing letters and gathering them in, as though in your old age you had found the real way to discover the eternal in the momentary, though you could only mummify it, and to spiritualize nature, though you could only hide it with a pretty mask. This is why we reproach you with insincerity. The old bigwig kept his eyes musingly on mine, smiling as before. Then, to my surprise, he asked, "You must have a strong objection, then, to the magic flute of Mozart." And before I could protest, he went on, "The magic flute presents life to us as a wondrous song. It honors our feelings, transient as they are, as something eternal and divine. It agrees neither with Herr von Kleist nor with Herr Beethoven. It preaches optimism and faith." I know," I cried in a rage. God knows why you hit of all things on the magic flute that is dearer to me than anything else in the world. But Mozart did not live to be 82. He did not make pretensions in his own life to the enduring and the orderly and to exalted dignity as you did. He did not think himself so important. He sang his divine melodies and died. He died young, poor and misunderstood. I lost my breath. 1,000 things ought to have been said in 10 words. My forehead began to sweat. Goethe said, however, very amiably, "It may be unforgivable that I live to be 82. My satisfaction on that account was, however, less than you may think. You are right that a great longing for survival possessed me continually. I was in continual fear of death and continually struggling with it. I believe that the struggle against death, the unconditional and self-willed determination to live, is the motive power behind the lives and activities of all outstanding men. My 82 years showed just as conclusively that we must all die in the end as if I had died as a schoolboy. If it helps to justify me, I should like to say this too. There was much of the child in my nature, curiosity and love of wasting time in play. Well, and so it went on, till I saw that sooner or later there must be enough of play." As he said this, his smile was quite cunning, a downright roguish leer. He had grown taller, and his erect bearing and the constrained dignity of his face had disappeared. The air, too, around us was now ringing with melodies, all of them songs of Goethe's. I heard Mozart's Violets and Schubert's Again Thou Fillest Break and Veil quite distinctly, and Goethe's face was rosy and youthful, and he laughed. And now he resembled Mozart like a brother, now Schubert, and the star on his breast was composed entirely of wild flowers. A yellow primrose blossomed luxuriantly in the middle of it. It did not altogether suit me to have the old gentleman avoid my questions and accusations in this sportive manner, and I looked at him reproachfully. At that he bent forward and brought his mouth, which had now become quite like a child's, close to my ear, and whispered softly into it, "You take the old Goethe much too seriously, my young friend. You should not take old people who are already dead seriously. It does them injustice. We immortals do not like things to be taken seriously. We like joking. Seriousness, young man, is an accident of time. It consists, I don't mind telling you in confidence, in putting too high a value on time. I, too, once put too high a value on time. For that reason I wished to be 100 years old. In eternity, however, there is no time, you see. Eternity is a mere moment, just long enough for a joke." And indeed there was no saying another serious word to the man. He capered joyfully and nimbly up and down, and made the primrose shoot out from his star like a rocket, and then he made it shrink and disappear. While he flickered to and fro with his dance steps and figures, it was borne in upon me that he at least had not neglected learning to dance. He could do it wonderfully. Then I remembered the scorpion, or Molly, rather, and I called out to Goethe, "Tell me, is Molly there?" Goethe laughed aloud. He went to his table and opened a drawer, took out a handsome leather or velvet box, and held it open under my eyes. There, small, faultless, and gleaming, lay a diminutive effigy of a woman's leg on the dark velvet, an enchanting leg, with the knee a little bent and the foot pointing downwards to the end in the daintiest of toes. I stretched out my hand, for I had quite fallen in love with the little leg, and I wanted to have it. But just as I was going to take hold of it with my finger and thumb, the little toy seemed to move with a tiny start, and it occurred to me suddenly that this might be the scorpion. Goethe seemed to read my thought, and even to have wanted to cause this deep timidity, this hectic struggle between desire and dread. He held the provoking little scorpion close to my face and watched me start forward with desire, then start back with dread, and this seemed to divert him exceedingly. While he was teasing me with the charming, dangerous thing, he became quite old once more. Very, very old. 1,000 years old, with hair as white as snow, and his withered greybeard's face laughed a still and soundless laughter that shook him to the depths with abysmal old man's humor. End of section 3.